was showing that I was working on these ceramics because I like to mix kind of handmade things with digital stuff. And so I was going to show you the last thing I've been working on are these. I've been working on this mug, um, and I've been learning about this graffito technique, which is when you apply um, a sort of paint. It's called underglaze, and then you scratch. So the way I did this mug, this hasn't been fired. This is still in process. Is that I created this template um, in Cuddle. Uh, like I drew these wolves on my sketchbook before, and I thought they were like a good candidate for doing like that scratching thing. And so this template I created in Cuddle, where I cut out the wolves out of chipboard. This one came out of there. And then I used these to roll, I rolled a slab of clay, which is just like a flat sheet. And then I used these to cut it out and create this cylinder. But also when I rolled it, then this created this kind of like raised section, which is my little figure. And so you can see that this character is a bit raised. And then of course that was also this was the size of the slab that I used to roll the mug. And then so then I get the raised character there, and then I did the underglaze and scratched it. So I think the experimentation is going well. This is my little cute stamp I made, also made in Cuddle. I think with the wolves I started actually making these big planter. This one also hasn't been fired, but one of the biggest things I've made so far. This thing, but the technique here was pretty similar. I actually this is to create these indentation. What I did was, here's my chipboard thing. So actually this is the other one. So I also rolled it onto my slab to create the kind of raised shape that I could then paint with underglaze and then scratch. I think the thing I kind of got for free is that when I cut these, I also got these kind of inside. And so once this was kind of raised on the surface, then I actually could use these guys to scratch the eye and the star, roughly. So I think next I'm gonna put a little red underglaze here, and then this is gonna be fired. My kind of planter with wolves. So anyway, that was for the quick show and tell. But the subject of today's live stream, more related to Cuddle, is that people have been asking how to modify Cuddle templates. And there are several different requests. And this kind of we have covered in different ways before. But I think the thing I want to present today, is a sort of tour of how templates are constructed. And in general, I just want to kind of give you the sense that sometimes there is not a clear single answer for how to modify a Cuddle template, because each template has been sort of handcrafted by different people, and they all might have different ways of approaching things. So it's not like there is a single way of doing things. It's more like the attitude you have towards these is that you go and look at the template and see if you can sort of understand how things are made. And then you can like make some changes. I think the comparison here can be something like, I was talking to Toby yesterday, and he was telling me that at some point he was like kind of modifying games by looking at the code, not necessarily understanding everything that was in the code, but sometimes you can find like a little section that says, oh, this is the image that's used for your sprite or for your character, and you can like try and change that image and kind of run the game again and see what happens. And then and I think that's similar to what I've heard some people narrate when they started coding. A lot of people started by modifying like HTML templates for different applications, and so it was kind of similar. Sometimes you open the code and you don't understand everything what's going on, but you kind of like parse some things, and you figure out that like, oh, if I change this thing here, maybe the color or the font will change. And I think the approach here is quite similar. It's kind of like when you were a kid, you would take things. I mean, I would take things apart and didn't understand everything that was going on, but it gave you an insight into what would happen. So anyway, I think that's the attitude I want to convey. It's kind of like go with the attitude that you don't necessarily know what's happening, but if you kind of tweak things around enough, you might see, kind of like mess around and see what happens. One question I get is, are templates proprietary? Not sure how to answer the question, but so the Codel templates, there are some that are marked Pro, which you get with your Pro subscription, and some are free, and you're free in general to kind of make remixes. That kind of means you're not necessarily free to sell them. I could be wrong about this, but you're not necessarily free to sell them, but you're free to make changes and make them work for your own uses. And then there are also templates in the, if you look at the Explore page, which is right here. Right now I'm kind of looking at just the Codel templates. You'll see that there are a lot of projects and templates that have been shared by the community. And so different people might have different ideas on how they're sharing those, maybe different types of licenses or so. But those are also a great source of places to find out how things are made. But let's get started with, I'm going to give you a quick tour of one of the templates, and I'm going to try and answer a couple of questions that were asked. So let's look at the Easter Bunny tag. So this one is right here. Also, yeah, someone mentioned that they love the new layout and categories for the templates page, and that, yeah, this is new. This is cool. There are new categories that you can see here on the top. And whenever you click on one of those categories, you'll get related templates. So I'm going to look at the Easter Bunny tag. And one important thing to know is that whenever you're going to start making changes on a template, you need to click this button that says Edit in Codel. And then you're going to get this little prompt down here that says, this project is owned by Codel, make a copy to save your changes. So interestingly enough, we can actually start making changes here. Like, let's say if I select, I'm going to here to the front, if I select these and make any random change, it's possible, but it's not going to stick. In order to make that change stick, you need to copy this project. So that means it's going to save a copy to your own projects, and that copy is not going to be public. So if I hit copy this project, it says you made a copy, your changes will now save to your own account. So maybe I'll change the name here just to know that that is now in my own account, and that's my private project. The cool thing, one cool thing about this feature is that, actually, let me open this. One cool thing about this feature is that now you can actually make as many changes as you want, and you always have the original to go back to. So if you break anything, or like quote unquote break, then you can always go back to the templates and start over again with the new one. And then the other thing that you can do is that you can have actually multiple. You can always have like multiple custom copies for things that work. So okay, let's take a look at this template. So templates, this kind of goes back to what we've been doing in the past few sessions, which is kind of introducing you to the different, components that we can see here on the left. Hopefully my face is not on the way. And then the parameters, which we can see here on the right. And each one of these templates is going to have its own different mix and uses of components and parameters. So let's start looking. Actually, I'm going to move myself a little to the right so we can look at those. Components here. So let's see. The first one says cut, and if I go look at the README, I believe that's what this one is. This is the cut. And so usually the cut will have the sort of final file. And then here on the left, I can keep on looking at it. So it's divided. This is the front, because this template has a front and a back. This is the back. This is the face. This is the bow tie. This is the daisy. This is the fur, no fur, whiskers, and something else, the switcher. So let's look at, see how things are made. Sometimes in order to see how things are made, we need to look at the inspector here on the right. And so if I kind of open this group, I can see that this particular composition is made out of the bow tie. I can connect these names to the names of these components. So I know this bow tie is probably this thing here. There is also a daisy, which is this one right here. And then there are some ways in which those get kind of used or hidden. So you can see that like at the moment we're looking at the daisy, which is this one in particular. And then that's controlled by these selection box right here. So then there is this group here that uses this connected text and is trying to fit it within a certain path. So you don't necessarily have to understand all of these things, but like we can already start seeing that like this group uses a component, for example, this daisy, to create this shape. And so, something I sometimes go and do is that I can look at this daisy and say like, oh, what would happen if I throw a change in here, like use a random shape? Will that show up? So I can go back to the front, and indeed that shows up right there. So that kind of tells me that it's another confirmation that this particular front is made up by grabbing this component daisy and placing it here and adding a certain modifier to it. So that kind of gives me the power to do certain things. Like, for example, someone made a change at some point where they changed the daisy to another shape that they wanted. So I'm gonna show you how to do that. I can also see that like the bow tie operates in a similar fashion. So I can make a similar change. So for example, if I go to the parameters here and I change the accessory to being the bow, it seems like now the bow is the component that's being used here. So if I go look at that bow and say just add a random circle, that random circle kind of translates to both the component that is called the front and to the cut. I think at the end, the way in which you realize if things are working or not is to go back to the README. So for example, if I add a star here to the bow, excuse me, if I add a star here to the bow, I know that it shows up there. And then if I go to the README, which is the component that's being shared, I can see that star, it shows up right there. So my changes are working. I think that's the that's the way in which I can find that out. Actually, that's kind of a cute mod. I like the star on the bow. So just to make things consistent, because we've been using that blue for scores, I can always take this star and make it blue. So that just becomes a score. I can look at the README here. So my bow now has a star. Let's see. I can make changes to the daisy as well. Let's say, for example, that we want to change the type of flower that the daisy kind of results in. So I can actually just make changes right here. Let me make something quick. Let's say I want the petals to be just kind of like a slightly different kind of weird shape. I don't have to call it weird. Just gonna make my own random petal. I just use the pen tool. I can kind of do a rotational repeat on that. That looks good. I can actually get rid of the existing one. Yeah. Then that rotational repeat, I can do a Boolean union. How did I mess this up? Yeah, I should should group it before I do the Boolean union. Probably not. But anyway, let's see if things are working. So yeah, that flower is showing up. It's not quite showing up the way I intended. Oh, I see. Of course, I don't want that circle in there. It selected too many things. So that circle is the central circle, and then what if I do a well-done score? Nope. Oh, right. So I need to fill in the center part. Thanks, Toby. So I think what's happening here is that I need to fill in all those sections that are right there. So thank you. Yeah, so that's what I wanted. Thanks a lot. Yeah, what was happening is that these little triangular intersections were showing up. But then I still get this outside circle. So let's see how the flower turns out. It's a big flower. It's kind of a silly looking flower. I can make it a little smaller. And then finally, it was using a red stroke to be consistent there. And so now I just kind of like haphazardly modify that daisy to be some sort of other flower. So I was taking, in this example, I was kind of taking advantage of an existing component and modifying that existing component to do different things. I suppose the last one I can show you here, although I got pretty far with this, is that somebody asked how to change the colors of things because they, for example, had a Lightburn setup where they were using specific colors for what they wanted. So with the Cuttle templates, we've tried to have a sort of homogeneous way of doing certain things because they're like just sort of commonly used, or they just work really well with things like the Glowforge interface. So in general, we use red for outside cuts, black for inside cuts, and we've been using blue for scores. That's kind of like just our own kind of common but somewhat private language. But like, of course, you can use any color that you want, and some people have set up those colors for themselves. So one question that someone had was, how do I change those particular colors? And so once again, you kind of go back and inspect different things to see how they are made. And in this case, we have this cut. But I can kind of like go here and say, for example, what if I select the front and change that color? So in general, you can, with the daisy, I knew I can change the color right here by changing the stroke. So with the front, I can like click on it and see what happens. And let's say I want to choose another color. Let's say we use that purple. And so Oh, this is an interesting thing because here we're using this selective modifier. Um, this one might be a little different. I suppose I need to, let's see, we can do that change. This one in particular uses this selective modifier, which is selecting whatever color is selected here to make the union. So for this one in particular, the change is a little more interesting because let's say if I do the front and I change the color of the stroke here to something else, yeah. Yeah, so this one in particular is kind of interesting because it kind of depends on the red being used for a different thing. But I think if I change this color to, let's see. So this one is using the color red to select things. But if at the end I change the stroke to say green, I kind of break things a little bit. So I think with this particular one, I'm gonna get in trouble. So this is one of those, sorry. I think this is one of those where it kind of depends. Like here in this case, you can see how understanding this template takes me a little bit. So the daisy I made is currently not welding. I just did an undo because the daisy itself is black. But I want that to be red. And if that's red, then it welds. So I suppose if I wanted to change all the colors here, I would have to really make a lot of changes throughout all the different things. So just to take a quick guess, if these were green, say that was my goal, I check the front, that is not welding. So then if I were to change these selective modifier to weld the green, that's also not welding because this particular group here is green. Yeah, I think it takes a lot of effort to change this particular one. So I'm gonna try still. Yeah, so the effort it took here was kind of figuring out what was happening. And in this case, say, this is what I just explained isn't necessarily going to work for all the templates, but in this particular case, we could ask the maker of the template, which is in the chat, and what I ended up doing in this case, if you want to replicate it, is that I made sure that the selective modifier was welding all the green. And so whatever is green got welded. And so I went ahead and changed the daisy I created, the different flower I created to be green. The reason the selective modifier is being used there is because we want, in this component, there are two colors. There is the outside cut, and then there is the score for the central circle. And so when you weld things, sometimes those different colors will disappear, but we wanted to keep that central circle. And so I went ahead and changed the group that created the outside and then the daisy. But if I were to change this particular one to another of the existing ones, like the bow, you'll see that is not welding all the outside. I would have to go and change the bow tie again to be green because that's the color I selected. And so now it's kind of working. So I guess this became, I turned this one into a tutorial on how to change these very specific template. So I think the other example I wanted to talk about. So anyway, I hope this kind of gives you an idea of like sometimes what it takes is to kind of dive into it and take it apart and kind of fail a little bit. I think the other one I wanted to cover is that someone had a question about how to add a ribbon to this other template. And I think this is within the scope of what we're doing. So I'm gonna try and look at it. So let's look at the circular name ornament. So once again, I'm gonna hit edit in Codel. I'm gonna copy the project just to make sure, I'm making changes on the one that I have. I'm gonna call this one plus ribbon. And then this one again has a component called the cut, and then has a front section. So they look very similar, or they look kind of like the same. The reason this one has a cut component is because in this section there is one that says include backer. So when you check that, then it will add this backer. But otherwise, we have the front, we have the backer, and we have different versions of the inside name. And there's this code component that makes that switch happen. So we won't necessarily go into that. So once again, to see how I make changes into this, if I wanted, this is probably a random choice, but if I wanted like something on the backer, I could just add it to the backer component. We don't want that necessarily. But the question that someone made is like, how do I add a ribbon to this particular template? I suppose one quick answer would be you can always add an emoji to that name. I added space there. And so there is an emoji that I can add. If I select emoji, there is one called, is it ribbon? Yeah. So there is this little reminder ribbon. And so that could work for your uses. So that's like one quick way to do it. I think another way of doing it is to kind of go ahead and add a sort of ribbon shape on top of the template. And so I think in this case, I'm gonna create a component actually, and then I'm gonna grab an emoji, and I'm gonna make this emoji that particular ribbon. This is just like a quick way of finding that, of kind of using a shape that is kind of ribbon-like. And then I don't necessarily, I mean, one way to do it is I could grab this one. How big is it? Let's make it, I'm gonna move myself over here. So you can look at the transform. So I probably want it to be a little bit bigger. So I created this component. I don't want it to have a fill. Let's select here, get rid of that fill. I do want it to have a stroke. So then I would add that particular thing to the front. So if I go and place it here, I could probably make it bigger. But the idea is that I wanted these to be kind of connected to that. And so I can select that, and I can select this outside group, or select those both. I want to make sure I'm not selecting the text. And then I can do that, something like the weld and score. And so this one in particular, we can see that the ribbon is actually connected because I can see that the score here is blue, but then this particular ribbon is going to have those cuts. And so you might be okay with that or not. And if you don't like those cuts, one option I could try is I can get rid, I could take this emoji and just convert it to paths. And then I could get rid of the kind of sections I don't necessarily like here. I'm going to double click. At this point, it's not an emoji anymore. It's just a set of paths that I can modify. So I can kind of say, get rid of that one, get rid of that one. Yeah, why not? Let's get rid of all of it. And if I go back to the front, I can see that, I kind of get the effect that I want. I think, well, I kind of ran out of time. I think a quick hack I would do for this one is that I actually want a little score to create that kind of look for the ribbon to be kind of under itself. So I think a quick thing I would do here is I could create another shape that goes on top, something like these. Just gonna trace it myself. And then I'm gonna double click on it, and I'm just gonna stretch that a little bit like this. And I'm gonna leave it like that, so it kind of covers that line. So the effect of these should be, I'm just gonna make it blue so you don't get red, so you see. The effect of that at the end with the weld and score is that that shape just kind of also gets welded and scored, and so it creates that line. And so I think that's how I would go about adding that particular one. And just to do a final check to see if things are working, if I look at the cut, that is working. I can look at the README, and I got that ribbon there. And then in the last minute, finally, I would probably want a way to change the size of that. And so, to be consistent with what we've been doing before, I could always, let's say, I could name that component my ribbon. That makes sense to me, so I can see it here. So I could add this ribbon has a position within the front. I could say something like extract as parameter is right here. I actually want it to be a project parameter, so I'm gonna move it to the project. So now it's here. I'm gonna give it a name, ribbon position. And I think similarly, I could do something for the scale. So I could extract as parameter. So right there, I'm gonna move it to be a project parameter, and that's the ribbon scale. And if things are working, I could actually change the scale and move it. So I could make it something like that. So I can get that kind of nice weld and score on the name. So that would be the quick way of doing that. I think this is gonna break with certain aspects of this template. Like for example, if we start changing things about how the name is being treated, we might get into trouble. But maybe that's a good subject for another time. So anyway, thanks a lot for coming over to the live stream. I hope this was helpful and gave you a sense of please go in and mess with templates. So cool. Yeah, it was a little bit jam-packed. Thanks. Anyway, thanks for coming. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.